Welcome, guys. Let's break down the body language.
Brett.
You know, voters tell pollsters all over the country.
Kamala Harris is seen maintaining a confident and composed demeanor. Her hands are often placed on the table, palms down, which reflects control and authority. She makes consistent eye contact with the interviewer, demonstrating attentiveness and engagement.
To rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you,
now,
just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration.
Harris becomes more animated, especially when discussing the reversal of Trump border policies. She uses hand gestures to emphasize points. Her facial expressions show frustration, especially when interrupted. She leans slightly forward, signaling her desire to clarify her stance.
Do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the chip...
Her posture remains firm, but there are visible signs of defensiveness. When the interviewer brings up policies on immigration, Harris's hand gestures become more pronounced, using them to counter the interviewer's points. She often raises her index finger while speaking, which can indicate a need to control the conversation.
Exactly.
21. It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the...
Yes, ma'am. May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate, and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising, and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
As the conversation shifts to crime and immigration, Harris's body language reflects discomfort. Her arms fold briefly, a classic sign of defensiveness or self-protection. However, she quickly reverts to more open gestures to project authority again.
Resources into prosecuting transnational criminal organizations, which I have done as the Attorney General, former Attorney General of a border state.
Madam Vice President, a couple of things.
Prosecuted trafficking of drugs, guns, and human beings. And Donald Trump, but let me just finish.
6 Democrats voted against that bill.
Learned about...
She begins to assert dominance with more decisive movements. Her tone hardens, and she punctuates her statements with quick downward hand motions. Her facial expressions remain serious and focused as she talks about legislative efforts on border security.
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There's no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced.
During this segment, Harris shows empathy when addressing the tragic outcomes of released immigrants who committed crimes. Her facial expressions soften and her voice lowers. Her hands come closer together, reflecting a more restrained and empathetic posture.
And this election in 20 days will determine whether we have a president of the United States who actually cares more about fixing a problem, even if it is not to their political advantage in an election, because there was a solution, Brett.
She starts displaying a more assertive stance again, gesturing widely when describing policy efforts. Her eyes widen during moments of emphasis, signaling passion and strong belief in her points.
But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions. Let's talk about that as well.
But do you want to answer
in all fairness, I told you, I feel awful for what she and her family have experienced.
Harris interrupts the interviewer and becomes visibly frustrated, as seen by her stiffened posture. Her movements become quicker, and she leans forward slightly, signaling an increased intensity in her responses.
I think they're frustrated, and I get it. They want support. They want support, and that's what that border security bill would have done. These guys down at the border, these men and women, they're working hard. They're working around the clock. I get it.
As the interviewer presses on difficult questions, Harris's posture stiffens. Her lips tighten as she waits to speak, indicating irritation. She takes a more authoritative stance by placing her hands back on the table with palms down.
We are very clear, and I am very clear, as is Tim Walz, that we must support and enforce federal law, and that is exactly what we will do.
So Harris regains composure. She sits back slightly, taking a more relaxed but still engaged posture. Her gestures slow down, and she punctuates her speech with deliberate pauses, signaling careful thought and control over the narrative.